Today I'd like to talk about 8 things that I wish I had known when I started learning languages on my own. Number 1, it's okay when you start for everything to be a big jumble. There's a lot of information that you're taking on that's totally brand new at the beginning, so it can seem a little bit overwhelming and like it's just too much. But as long as you're consistently studying and you're consistently exposing yourself to the language, eventually it's all going to kind of fall into place and start to make sense for you. 2, you can't do it alone. I'm an introvert, so I tend to like to hide in my little corner and study alone with text resources. But I realized after a while that that really wasn't working for me. So it wasn't until I kind of stepped outside of my comfort zone and started talking with people through language exchanges and through tutoring sessions through italki that my language abilities really took off. Learning to speak a language unfortunately requires you to speak the language. You're not going to get any better at speaking without actually practicing that skill. 3, there is no one right way to learn a language. When we look online and we see a lot of the other language learners, our tendency is to maybe compare ourselves to those people, and we really shouldn't do that because we all learn in our own way and we all learn at our own pace. And we also all have our own goals as to what we want to accomplish in certain languages. So you're really not being fair to yourself by comparing. And because we all have our own learning styles, what may work for one language learner won't necessarily work for you. And then also based on what your goals are, what one language learner is using might not be the best tool for you. And so you need to take all of that into consideration when you're picking what materials you're going to use to learn a language. 4, a little bit every day can do far more for you than studying for like a long time once a week. Constant exposure to the language is really beneficial to your language learning, whether that's reading, writing, speaking, listening. You want to hear or see that language that you're learning every single day. That constant exposure is going to do far more for your long-term memory than studying a lot rarely will do. There was actually a study done on students. I can't remember the exact source, but I read an article online, and if I find it again, I'll link to it in the box below. They took a look at students who crammed for an exam and students who actually studied multiple times in advance for the exam. The results on the test didn't show that much discrepancy, and even a week after the test was taken, when they re-quizzed the students, there wasn't that big of a difference either. But 2 weeks later, I believe it was, they retested the students once more, and those who had actually studied on more than one occasion, it was somewhere around 70 to 80% of those students passed the exam, whereas only about 30 of the students who crammed passed the exam. So long-term consistent exposure is really great if you want to retain the information that you're learning. 5, there are 2 kinds of study. The first kind of study is learning new material, and the second kind of study is reviewing that material. While it might seem like it makes sense to spend an equal amount of time doing both, if you're really looking to move forward quickly, exposing yourself to new material is one of the fastest ways to do that. So you need to spend more time doing that. But when you're actually focusing on retaining a language that you've already learned, you obviously want to spend more time working on review. So again, it depends on what your goals are with the language. 6, in order to succeed at learning a new language, you need to not only have goals, but you need to create plans to work towards those goals. So let's say, for example, one of my recent goals was to pass the HSK4 exam within a year of starting to learn Chinese. So that was my long-term goal. And the way that I broke it down was into 3-month intervals because there were 4 levels. So every 3 months, I worked on a new level of the HSK exam. So for the first 3 months of the year, I studied HSK1 vocabulary and grammar. For the second 3 months, 2. For the third 3 months, 3. And for the last 2 months, because the test was at the beginning of the 3rd month, I studied level 4. From there, I was able to spread the practice tests out over that 3-month period, and I tried to do each practice test twice in each 3-month period. And I was also able to break down the amount of vocabulary that I would need to study on a weekly and daily basis because I knew how many words there were per level. If I didn't create a detailed goal plan to help me get to the HSK4 by the end of the year, I wouldn't have succeeded at passing the test. So it really helps to not only have goals to work towards, so that you have some direction, but to sit down and develop a really detailed plan as to how you're going to get to that goal. 7, breaks in your language study are not a bad thing. I can sometimes be a bit of a perfectionist, so whenever I wasn't studying regularly, I kind of felt like a slacker. But then I started to realize that A break of a day or two was sometimes actually good for my language learning because it gave my brain time to process all of the information that I was learning, and I wasn't constantly being overwhelmed by new information. But you just have to make sure that your breaks don't last too long. And if they do, I'll put a link to a post I wrote on how to pick up a language after a long break in the box below. 8. There is a wonderful community online of language learners. This is something that I wish I knew when I started learning languages on my own. Why? Because not only does this community provide an excellent support system for language learners, but they've also been there and they've done that. So they've tried out a lot of the things that may be new to you, so you can kind of look at what they've done to figure out what's going to work for you. Speaking of the language learning community, there is actually one particular language learner that I'd like to mention today. Her name is Lindsay and she runs the website Lindsay Does Languages. Lindsay has a fantastic course for those who are interested in learning languages on their own called Successful Self-Study. I had the opportunity to try the course out before it was released, and I was really impressed by the content. And not only does she help you set up successful study habits, but she also has technical training. So all of the tools that she recommends as a part of the course, she sits down and walks you through how to use them effectively. That's the end of the 8 things that I wish I knew when I started learning languages on my own. I'll have a link to Lindsay's course and everything else I mentioned in the box below, as well as a link to the written article that corresponds to this video. It's all on yourlinguist.com. If you're a language learner and there's something that you wish you knew when you started, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. Thanks for watching.